This reminds me a bit of
I thought it's the spiral one. You got a photo of it. Look at it.
Right, guys, are we ready to go? Because it's 18:15. We start on. I assume the online will be coming online.
yeah.
Right. Right. And we have to do the notices as well in advance.
Sure, yes,
And
okay.
health and safety.
Yeah. Is that working?
Right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Covent Garden, and also welcome to those of you watching online to what I know will be an excellent evening with the photographic presentation from Benjamin Graham. I also say hello to those of you who will be watching at some point in the future on YouTube. If you enjoy the talk this evening and would like to do some more, then you're always welcome to join the LT Museum Friends. So before we hear from Benjamin, though, we're going to have the usual trailers and announcements. And first of all, you will have noticed that yet again, sadly, Susan Gilbert wasn't with us to welcome you all on the desk. Susan is still recovering from her illness. Hopefully she'll be with us soon, but I'm sure you'll all join with me in yet again sending our best wishes for her and for her health. And now the usual announcements. First of all, the fire arrangements. There isn't a fire evacuation drill planned for the next hour or so, so if the alarm does go off, please leave the building either at the back or at the door here and follow the instructions of the museum staff to evacuate. Next events we've got coming up. The next one is next Thursday, the 27th of April at 2 p.m. at Acton. We're going to have a talk from John Parkin, I see he's here this evening, on another photographic theme, on the scenic visual tour or scenic tour of London's road and rail network. Do you want to elucidate any more, John, or are you going to keep us all in suspense?
Well, there'll be lots of interesting pictures over the years, buses, trains, underground, a bit of all sorts.
Bit of all sorts. So
Worth coming to.
a potpourri of pictures.
There might even be a picture of a Trolleybus 654 Simmons Road, what can't be there.
Right. Well, actually, John, you've given me a nice lead in to... John has kindly stepped in at short notice because Roy Watts, who was down to speak, now can't come and talk to us until June. If you've booked for the Roy Watts talk thinking it was next Thursday and still wish to come to Roy Watts talk, you don't need to do anything. Your booking will still be honoured. And if you haven't booked, well, then please do. And if you haven't booked for John's talk, also please do so.
You do mean Thursday week, though, I know you said.
Sorry, Thursday week, the 27th. Just checking to see you were there. Yeah. I'll try and get the date right for this one. 4 weeks' time tonight, the 15th of May, here at Covent Garden at 6:15. We've got a talk by Sophie Bancroft. Now, Sophie is a senior manager with London Underground, and she's also TfL's rep on the museum board. And she's going to be talking about her experiences of diversity in the rail industry. So I think that's something slightly different from what we usually have, but I think it's going to be a very interesting and entertaining talk. So I would recommend you come along to that. The bookings on the website should be going up shortly after today. And then on the 21st of May, there's going to be a walking tour of Vauxhall and Nine Elms, led by our sales manager, John King. And probably as some of you know, John's talks are very popular. So I would keep an eye out for when this one comes out on the website. Again, I would think it'd be in the next couple of days, and early booking is advisable. So let's now get on to the main event. I'm delighted to introduce Benjamin Graham, an award-winning landscape photographer and a tutor at West Dean College in West Sussex. And Benjamin won the UK Landscape Photographer of the Year in 2017. Most recently, he's worked on 2 publications with our Friends trustee, Oliver Green, who's also up here with us this evening, on London Underground, the story of London's Tube, and London's great railway stations. And tonight we'll be showing, and I've got a chance to look at some of them here, and they're stunning pictures of some of the selections of the images that were commissioned for these books. And I'm also pleased to say that Oliver will be here to answer any difficult questions you'd like to give him. So can we give a warm welcome, please, to Benjamin and Oliver?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Are there ladies, plural, here? I'm struggling to... with two ladies. So, I didn't know what to call it, and eventually I decided I'd call it Underground, Overground. I hesitated to put Wombling Free as a subtitle. But I did wonder, as I was compiling this presentation, whether... have I reached my audience demographic nirvana tonight? That kind of Venn diagrammatical central convergence of all these people, gadget freaks, computer tech heads, photography nerds, and railway nutters. And it has to be the ultimate nerdy gathering. That's a compliment, by the way. And speaking of nerds, Oliver Green is here, transport historian, author, and senior research fellow at LTM, and as has already been said, he will field all your difficult questions. Also, an honour to have in the audience tonight Luke Agbamoni. You may know him from TV, Twitter, Tinder, all the usual places. Welcome, Luke. He produces some pretty amazing photography on the London Underground, and I have stolen loads of his ideas. As he has mine, I think, to be fair. So what am I doing here? Well, I offered to do a presentation about the sort of thing that I get up to in my backyard, which is the south coast of the UK. And I find myself out typically in all weathers, but I particularly love the sunrise, the early mornings, because the beaches of the south coast are unsullied by packs of dogs and tourists, and the sand is always freshly laundered and there's nobody around, particularly in the summer. And I'm blessed in the area because I have places like this, which is an RSPB nature reserve. These are the wetlands at, some of the wetlands at Pagham. Here's an example of some of the breakwaters that litter the whole of the south coast with these interesting navigation markers. I'm going to be saying a little bit about composition, a little bit about light tonight, but what I've done here is I've tried to put this post and this cross in an area that it lives in its own space here without being interfered with by these clouds. I've been quite careful in the way that I've put that composition together. These are the wetlands again. This is very recently, this is about a month and a half ago. We had fantastic misty conditions over the course of about a week and a half, and in the early morning when the sun is rising and we get these beautiful crimson, pink and salmon and golden colours, it's quite incredible to be out there in all the mist in the wetlands. This is sunset on the West Beach at Littlehampton, and here is a sunset at the river bend. It's what's known as Black Rabbit Hall, and this is Arundel Castle in West Sussex, silhouetted against the late evening skyline. I'm going to show you quite a few images tonight from a place called West Wittering. It's a really beautiful place, and I keep going back again and again to West Wittering because it's this gigantic area of sand, a huge sand shelf, and you get these wonderful uninterrupted westward views at sunset. This is a sunset image, and all of these shapes here are now gone. So the great thing about the coast is that the tide comes in, the tide goes out, and it rearranges the sand and the shingle spits, and every time you go back you get something completely new. And I went back to West Wittering recently and it's almost completely flat. Quite amazing what has happened there with the currents as they've gone in and out. This is Aldwick Rocks. There's an area of the south coast that is festooned with these rocks that appear every time the tide goes out quite a long way. This is a sunrise image, and this Aldwick is about 2 or 3 miles from Bognor, in between Bognor and Chichester. Always good to get out in the mist. This is another RSPB nature reserve at a place called Church Norton. Some very heavy mist in the early morning at dawn. And a few vertical shots. It's good practice with your photography to always come back with a few images in the vertical orientation. If you are lucky enough to be a National Geographic photographer, the commissioners will always insist that you come back with a bunch of verticals as well as standard landscape orientation horizontal shots, because for one, they don't know how they're going to be compositing the magazine, and they don't know where the pictures are going to end up and how they're going to be amongst all of the text, but also you might make the cover. So some beautiful mornings that we had recently. This is again is West Wittering. Some beautiful mornings that we had lately with mist and some beautiful sunrise colours of sort of salmon pink. And even managed to catch the moon in one of the shots there. We have a lot of this sort of stuff going on the south coast, lots of navigation markers, which gives you the opportunity to punctuate your image. With all these are known as visual punctuation. They kind of tell a little bit of a story in the image. Even on their own, they work. And I was overjoyed when this image made the Outdoor Photographer of the Year book in 2017 or 18, because it's Bognor Regis. And I took this image in almost, I think it was actually the longest day of the year or thereabouts. And you can see that the buoy over here has remained perfectly still. The water was completely flat. It was almost like standing on the edge of a lake. There were no waves at all. The sea was completely flat. And this is the point at which the sun is setting almost directly behind me. And this effect here is known as the belt of Venus, which is where you get the pink colours 180 degrees to the setting sun. Don't always get them, but when you do, they are beautiful for photography. And this is the image that very unexpectedly brought me the Landscape Photographer of the Year award, and it's probably the reason people tend to associate me with minimalist, high-key pastel elements of my portfolio. It's a very simple composition, excuse me, in a fairly anonymous location. Because an amazing view does not effortlessly transform into an amazing photograph. So time and time again, I've had people enthuse to me about an amazing view that they found because they've been out walking with the family, and they know that I like taking snaps, and so they impart their knowledge and they explain the route and the terrain and how to get there. So I go there, and it is a great view, but it's a rubbish photo. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get an amazing photograph. And an extraordinary location does not effortlessly transform into an extraordinary photograph. Also, difficult to acquire photographs are not necessarily the best photographs. It's easy to muddle them up. If you are emotionally invested in your galleries, you should always seek the counsel of another photographer that you trust to help you weed out the stuff that shouldn't be in your galleries. And don't assume that easy shots will be also rans or losers. Our personal vision reveals what is invisible to others. So very often I will take a group of people to a location, half a dozen or so, and a couple of them will start snapping immediately and shoot off like 30 images, and 2 or 3 of the others are standing around going, what can I shoot here? And that's because our personal vision is unique to us all. And I did suffer a bit with imposter syndrome after the Landscape Photographer of the Year win. I'm over all that now, thank you for asking. At the time, though, I was very conscious that many entrants had climbed through blizzards and camped out under canvas on the sides of mountains in sub-zero conditions in order to get their amazing images. And all I'd done was I'd made an impromptu visit to a local beach to acquire my image. And again, National Geographic again, a National Geographic photographer spoke to me at the photography show a couple of years later, and he said, you could have broken your leg before you took that shot. So almost always the success of a photo has little or nothing to do with the hardship or otherwise you experience acquiring it. Elliot Erwitt said, photography is an art of observation. It is often about making something interesting of an ordinary place. And always be aware that you can make great photos happen even in the most modest of locations. Because there are no secret places, there are only special moments. However, every rule has its exceptions, and here's an exceptional example of that rule being flouted. And on initial observation, some of you may be thinking that I've probably lost control of my critical faculties. What is this dirty, gungy, blurry nonsense? But I can say with certainty that this is one of the greatest photographs ever taken, and certainly the most difficult ever to acquire, because this is sunrise on Mars. It's an example of location actually being the essence of its greatness. And now you know where it was shot, you're filled with wonder at the enormity of the difficulty of acquiring that particular image. You feel differently now you know what it is. So not many of us are going to visit Mars, I suspect, in the near future anyway, but back on Earth it's very important here that we craft some feeling into our images. They need to have a bit of emotion. Maya Angelou said, people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And this is the first most important thing that I will say to you today. And that is, it's not what you shoot, it's when and how you shoot it. So here is a terrible photo. And I can say that because it's my photo. And I took it for the purposes of the presentation. So that is everything about it is terrible. But it is the kind of shot that somebody just might randomly take a picture of, this whole location, and take it home and say, that's where we had our ice creams when we visited Felpham recently. So, but the light's terrible, the subject is terrible, the composition is terrible, the exposure is not that good, the crop's terrible, it's got negative tension, I'll talk a bit more about that later on in the presentation. It's got distracting signage, you are compelled to read signage, which is why signage is generally, not always, but generally so disastrous in photography, because you are compelled to look at this and it's meaningless, really. There's litter on the grass, there's a random white van, there's a rubbish bin, everything about it is terrible. I'd much rather show you this. So in this one, the light is better, the exposure is better, the composition is better, the timing's better, and the mood and the atmosphere are better. And what do they have in common? It's the same place. And all I've done is walk 30 seconds from here to here. It's a different day, obviously. I've walked 30 seconds from here to here, and I have shot this second image on a tripod. It's a relatively long exposure. It's probably about 3 or 4 seconds, so the water has become quite misty. And all in all, a better shot to take home and say, that's where we had our ice creams when we went to Felpham. And most importantly, I shot it in the Twilight Zone. A lot of you will remember the Twilight Zone, obviously. It's one of the zones that you need regularly to be out in if you want to produce consistently interesting outdoor images. That means for the dawn in the summer, being up and out shooting at about 4 a.m. I can sense the dread. Bill Shatner, before he became Captain Kirk of the Starship Enterprise, and another couple from the Twilight Zone. So the twilight in the evening is also available to you, to all of you night owls out there who find it very difficult to get up in the morning. It must be said, though, you're typically less likely to encounter crowds of tourists at 4 a.m. than 9 p.m. in London. But at this time of year, with the dawn fast approaching 5 a.m, you need to be on location at 4. So very often I'm up at 3 in order to be there at 4 in order to catch the early light before the sun breaks the horizon. And staying out that same day for the sunset is not easy because the sun doesn't go down till about 10 o'clock at night. So it can be a long day. But the other thing I want to impress on you is the transition zone. And those of you who work with your digital files in Photoshop or similar processing programs will know transition zones as the really vexing areas in digital files where zones of high contrast collide and give you annoying edge halos or chromatic aberration and make the image look a bit crunchy. No, what I really mean is you need to be out at dawn, at twilight, in the golden hour, in the blue hour, clearing rain, brewing storms, receding incoming tides, mist, frost, morning dew, all those things will have a massive effect on your outdoor photography. Here's an example of some heavy snow clouds. Again, this is West Wittering, and this is a clearing storm at the Burling Gap out towards Newhaven. And if you plan your images, sometimes you can do that. There was a storm coming in. I can't remember the name of the storm, but I planned a trip to Newhaven, and I knew exactly where I wanted to be in terms of positioning myself. And I got the light behind the lighthouse. This one was syndicated to quite a lot of papers and magazines across the world. I can't remember the storm. I think it might have been Storm Brian. But I knew I wanted to shoot in that direction because I wanted to backlight the waves at high tide, and the peak of the storm was at high tide. So I found myself a place behind a big metal sign, and the drizzle was driving into my face and the sea mist, and I had to leap out from behind the sign and fire my camera off with a telephoto lens. And every time I shot a few, I had to get back in and then wipe the front element lens off and then go back out and shoot a few more. And I shot about 120, I think, that day, and that was one of my favourites. And the sign I was hiding behind said, "Welcome to sunny Newhaven." And any idea what that time exposure might be, that time value? Any photographers in here? It's 2,500th of a second. Here's an example of exposing for the bright areas in a frame. So I've exposed for this area here in order not to completely blow out my highlights, and that's had the effect of darkening down the sky and darkening down the foreground. And it gives this really brooding image. You can just see a little bit of light here leaking across the shingle from the street lamps on the boulevard. And this ferocious livid sky is very unusual for the UK, but we do get them now and again. We don't get them that often because, as a general rule in this country, the sun comes up and goes down behind another bank of cloud. So when we don't have that, it gives the opportunity to underlight the clouds as the sun drops below the horizon. We're more often than not going to see conditions more like this. Again, this is a West Wittering shot. Here's another storm that I was out in the morning. Here's another example of visual punctuation. So I've got the camera on a tripod. This exposure is probably about a half a second. It's given just enough movement in the waves here, but I've used the tripod to stabilize the part of the image that's not moving, which is this navigation marker at the entrance to the River Arun. Here's an interesting artifact. This is part of the Mulberry Harbour from World War II, and this is in Pagham Harbour on the south coast. And there was an almighty storm apparently on the 5th of June, the day before the D-Day landings, and a lot of these things were moored around the corner there in Pagham Harbour, and some of them broke loose. And this one washed up on the beach at Pagham, and it's been decomposing there for the last 80 years. And every time the tide goes out, it reveals it. And what I've done here is given a 30-second exposure, again with the tripod, and that has smoothed the surface of the water. It's given it this lovely milky effect, and this is at sunset. Similarly, this shot, I can't remember where it was, probably fairly near to the last one, but again, I've got the visual punctuation here that draws the eye, and these are just semi-submerged breakwater posts on the south coast. Rocks, navigation marker, and a very convenient moon. And another one shot down at Wittering with a lovely new moon. So I've included this one because it has a bearing on the images that I'm going to show you from London tonight. And this is a magical moment that occurs a couple of times a day. And this one happens to be sunset. The sun has just dropped below the horizon. And there's a moment, depending on the time of year, depending on how much cloud cover there might be, and it lasts between 5 and 10, 12 minutes, and it's when all the light in the scene is in perfect balance. And so the sun hasn't dropped far enough below the horizon to make the shadows a completely dense black. So there's still enough daylight to illuminate everything, and the artificial lights have come on and they're not overpowering the night sky. If I waited another half an hour and I exposed for the artificial lights, it would make the sky black. So this is a wonderful time, and because it's so rare, because it's such a tiny, minuscule portion of the day, it's what will transform your pictures in the built landscape. Because in photography, it's all about the light. Its quality, its direction, and its colour. And the reason it's all about the light is because the only rule you cannot break is no light, no photograph. There's an exception to the rule, of course. Some smart-ass cosmologists have recently come up with a photo that flouts even this immutable law, and they've produced an image of the black hole in the distant galaxy Messier 87. And I'll return to this a bit later in the presentation. But meanwhile, again, back down here on planet Earth, light is the miracle, magical ingredient that turns this into this. And creating three-dimensionality and depth in your images is a crucial part of the composition process. If you're going to successfully represent a three-dimensional scene with what is essentially a two-dimensional medium, then eliminating flatness has to be your priority. Remember, you are painting with light. It's derived from the Greek, meaning painting, drawing, or designing with light. I'm going to say a few words about composition. Some of you may have seen the rule of thirds before. It means that the frame that holds the image is subdivided by two equidistant horizontal and two equidistant vertical lines, and the intersections here are known as the points of positive tension. Negative tension, you've probably all experienced photographs yourselves that you've produced with negative tension. For example, if you shoot somebody standing in front of a wall light, you'll find that they've got a lampshade growing out of their ear when you get the photograph back. That's negative tension. But these points are positive tension, and when you place subjects or parts of subjects on them, it can create a very powerful composition. Works in the vertical too, obviously. And here's an example of cropping lines on an image that shows the rule of thirds in operation. So we've got this line here defining the waves that are breaking on the shingle, this line here that more or less defines the horizon, and this point of positive tension at the cloudburst. Here's another example of it working, two puffins. This is not my image, but these puffins have got what they call nose room. So they've got something to look into. And this puffin here is on that positive line, and the point of positive tension there where his face is. Tessellated triangles is another very powerful motif that you can incorporate into your photography, not just in outdoor photography or city, urban, built environment photography, but also in portraiture, for example. This is Terry O'Neill's portrait of David Bowie in 1975. You can see when I see how the diagonal lines are working there. And also be aware of the Fibonacci, also known as the golden spiral, introducing shape and form that describes this sort of geometry into an image, produces powerful flow, dynamism. And once you have these basic ideas of composition in your head, it becomes second nature to spot potential images that are compliant with these rules. This is the spiral staircase at Borough Tube Station, defining the Fibonacci. And it needn't be precisely defined or smooth curves. Here is the very striking Spinnaker Tower in Portsmouth at sunset, and here is the tower's observation deck stairwell. See how the Fibonacci is evident here, and similarly here. This is looking up the staircase at the Grand Hotel at St Pancras. And I can't take credit for the next example of Fibonacci ratio compliance, but whoever worked it out and spotted it, dubious respect to them. Moving on. So you can carry multiple notions of compositional propriety around in your head, so much so that it can become a bit of a confusion of convergences. Just be aware that the rules do generally work for a reason. After all, who are we to argue with the ancient Greeks and the Renaissance Italians? So don't let the rules become your master. Master the rules, and then learn all the rules like a pro, and then break them all like an artist. So here's an example of negative tension working well. So you remember the lampshade growing out of the ear? There's an example of someone who has used the negative tension to positive effect. Really clever picture. So here's a truly 21st century spectacle. This is a clamour of bystanders all taking the same photo of the same thing at the same time, and all the photos are probably pretty terrible. So out of all these photographers, who do you think actually got the best shot on this occasion? The one who took this shot. The one who thought laterally. The person who turned their camera around and pointed in the opposite direction and produced something really interesting that raises more questions than it answers. You just don't know why they're there. You don't know what they're waiting for. Is it royalty? Is it a pop star? Is it a religious leader? What are they doing? And it was nothing to do with gear, and it produced an image that can only be described as the mastery of the mystery of the moment. So the second most important thing I will say to you today, what was the first thing? It's not what you shoot, it's when and how you shoot it. The second most important thing, it's not the gear you shoot with, it's how you shoot with the gear. So here's a satisfactory couple of coastal images that I made recently to illustrate my point. It's a tripod-mounted long exposure at dawn of a breakwater marker fairly near to where I live. I can't remember where. And this one I shot a few moments later, and both very satisfactory, and I shot them both on this. And this is a 2006 12 megapixel Canon 400D with a partly functional plastic fantastic kit lens. And you can buy this today on eBay for 50 quid. So how easily we are persuaded to part with many hundreds, if not many thousands, by camera manufacturers for often quite merely incremental improvements in image quality over our previous gear. And cameras are improving all the time, I do understand that. But you can practice quite happily with some very modestly priced second-hand equipment that's coming in £1,000 less than the latest iPhone and producing better images. You can't change the rules of physics. If your sensor is bigger and your lens is bigger, you will get a bigger picture. There's a limit to what technology can do at the moment still. If iPhones were as amazing as they made out, then all sports photographers on the touchline of international tournaments would be like this, wouldn't they? But they're not. They're all lined up with their proper cameras and their big lenses in order to get the great shots. So, great photography is acquired through practice, not purchase, which goes some way to mitigating this black hole experience. So, What on earth has any of this got to do with photographing trains, railway stations, or the urban built environment? Well, remember this, the slide? The lighting principles that I discussed in it are evident here in this one. And when I ran through the presentation earlier with Oliver, I showed him that one, and I'd said to him how that had worked in the book, and he said it's not in the book. So I'd like to invite Oliver to interject now if he'd like to, because we're going to run through a series of images that I've shot for London's great railway stations and also for the story of the Tube. And then I'll show you at the end some of the new stuff that I've managed to produce on the Elizabeth line and the other extensions and refurbishments that have been done in the last sort of 6 years. So this one is Canada Water, and the sun is just rising over here through this area. This guy refused to move. But I thought, that's okay, he can just stay there. But you see how the artificial lights work in this picture alongside the daylight. Similarly, this shot, this is the Docklands Light Railway at Canary Wharf. And this one, Crossrail, again at Canary Wharf. Here's an example of the twilight working to my advantage as the light bleeds through from the outside to the inside. Some of you may know about the white balance settings on a camera. The white balance is the differential between the blue in the picture and the yellow in the picture. When you adjust the white balance in order to make the artificial lighting appear white, it adds blue into the file, and you get this lovely leakage of that sort of pale violet colour coming in from the outside. Only works when the light levels are low outside, but again, another advantage of shooting at twilight and in the early hours, you get that lovely glow of ultraviolet coming through. This is Uxbridge and interwar. Is it interwar, this one, Oliver? Earth to Oliver. Is that an interwar one? Oh, that's an interwar station, Uxbridge, yeah. So what's going on here is the daylight is leaking through the skylights. It's an extremely orange lighting in Uxbridge. It's very, very weird. And when you add enough blue to get the interior lights looking white, it turns the outside lights really violet. And these modern trains all have daylight balanced lighting, so that turns the lighting inside the carriages blue as well. Another lovely station, Chiswick Park. This one shot at sunset. And a lovely modern station. I like it anyway. I think this takes some of its design cues from the interwar stations by Charles Holden, but it kind of modernises it all. A really beautiful station. Whether you're a tourist, a resident, or a commuter, because this is about 4:30 a.m., it's a view that very few people ever see. It's typically blocked by a relentless procession of cars and taxis and buses and delivery trucks, and it's hectic with crowds and it's festooned with litter. But first thing in the morning, 4:30, I got lucky and it had this woman just stood there waiting for her night bus. It gives it that kind of Dennis Hopper, a whiff of Dennis Hopper about it. And you don't have to be out shooting when the colours are super bright. Even when the dusk is quite grey, it can work in conjunction with some of the bleakness of the built urban environment, or act as a counterpoint to the grandeur. And this was towards the end of lockdown, and I actually managed to set the tripod up in the middle of the road without getting knocked over to get this shot. And this one actually ended up in London's Great Railway Stations book, and that was the page opposite the foreword by Sir Peter Hendy. And this, one of my favourite shots also, I didn't think this made the book, but Oliver pointed out tonight that it did. I haven't been to this location for about 6 years. I can only imagine this tree is about this big now. But at the time it worked really well because it just sits inside the concrete here off the wall. I'm very fond of that picture. And then when you are out and about and you're going from one location to another, as photographers we do tend to shoot one place and then we pack up and we put a tripod over our shot and we march to the next location and we don't notice things on the way. Very important to keep an eye out for stuff on your way through the landscape. So here's a hideous public art monstrosity that I came across in the Hyde Park Serpentine one time. I think this was about 2017 or something. And somebody had just put this huge pile of oil drums painted vermilion and white striped in the middle of the water. And I thought, how am I going to photograph that? And I took that shot and I thought, oh no, it's just really rubbish. And I looked down and I shot that. And while I was shooting the reflections in the water, that makes a much more interesting photo than the previous one, which is more representational of the scene. The detail of the scene is so much more interesting. And while I was shooting, this little chap swam into view. And if I'd shown you that first, you'd probably say that was an artificial intelligence picture. But in order to build you up to that, I showed you what the scene was. And then travelling around, more reflections. These are just reflected buildings in the surface of the canal water at Canary Wharf. And you can capture the most fascinating shapes and colours in the water. Just standing around for like 20 minutes, you'll find loads of stuff to shoot. And here's another one that I shot out the back of Paddington Station. Also, reflections in buildings can be super effective. These are the plate glass windows of an office block at Canary Wharf, reflecting the early morning sun on buildings on the opposite side of the canal. It makes for a really interesting shot, endlessly fascinating shapes and colours in there. So, early starts and late finishes. I'm not saying you can't get decent shots in the day, of course you can, but then everyone is out shooting then. If you want to make your pictures stand out, you need to be out there in interesting times when the light and the colours are more interesting than in the daytime, because the sun comes up, the light goes full spectrum, it's the same all day until it goes down again. So it's the same for hours and hours and hours. Yes, I appreciate you can get some interesting skies, but the early morning, really, there's no substitute. And believe me, 20 years ago, if I saw the dawn, it's because I was still awake from the night before. but now I have the reason to get up. So you are also blessed in London with a treasure trove of underground interiors for photography, where the lighting is constant, whether it's 4 a.m. or 4 p.m. I can't remember where this is, and Oliver and I talked about it earlier and thought it might be Marble Arch. Any ideas, Luke? It's black. It's black.
Oh, that could be Marble Arch.
I think it, yeah, we did think it might be Marble Arch. Yeah. But always be on the lookout for reflections, because that's a more interesting shot than turning round and just shooting the train, waiting at the platform. Here's an example of an establishing shot for the beautiful Charles Jagger statue in Paddington Station that puts it underneath the roof. But at the same time, you can isolate the detail and create an entirely different mood for the image by shooting closer in. And if you can't get everything in because you don't have a wide enough lens, you can always shoot parts of stations. That's Kingscross, obviously. And I've shot the entire thing so many times, and I've never been 100% happy with the fan of the interior. And I think that's my favourite shot of all the ceiling images that I've taken in there. And this one, another way to look at the refurbishment. I've got the departure boards reflected in the balcony glass. Oliver and I were together shooting for London's great railway stations, and this Javelin train came in, and it was exactly in the middle of the roof gantry. And I went back to this location half a dozen times. It never happened again. And this one ended up on the cover, and it doesn't have the pillars in because the book is quite narrow. But this is what we call a frame within a frame, which is another useful photography motif. And this one I shot looking back in the other direction, which says a lot about the train and the station without showing much of either. Any ideas what they are? These are? Excellent. Who was that at the back? It is Euston Station Ticket Hall. And there they are on the ceiling underneath all of the ticket vending machines. There's a statue of the wonderful Sir John Betjeman at St Pancras, and I shot it with his face in many different ways, and in the end my favourite shot was this one of him gazing up at the roof that he spent so much of his time saving. And I've used a fairly wide aperture so that it's thrown the roof out of focus, but it's focused enough for you to see what it is, and the subject of the image remains Betjeman holding on to his hat. I shot this one when I was scouting as well. Got lucky. The sun was just in the right place and coming in through the ticket hall of St Pancras. And this one, I just asked a guy on the door of the hotel, could I come in and take a picture? And he said, yeah, all right. So I came in and shot this staircase. Got anything to say about that, Oliver? That staircase? This staircase. What's the name of the hotel? You need to turn your mic on. Have you got your mic on?
Better?
Can you hear him? Excuse me a minute.
That's all, isn't it?
That's on. Where's your microphone? It's inside your shirt. Hang on to that. I'm sorry about my friend. Okay, hold that. Just hold it up, because it was inside your shirt. There you go. You can talk now.
Okay, so yes, we took the photograph during lockdown when the station was closed and the hotel was closed as well. And we managed to blag our way into this, which was fortunate because everywhere else we had to get permission. And here was this wonderful bit of Victorian architecture by Sir Gilbert Scott, and there was absolutely nobody around. So we took photographs almost as it was when it was first opened in the 1870s.
Yeah, it's absolutely stunning, and if you've not been in, you really should go. It's quite amazing. So, moving on. This is Charing Cross. See, even the 1980s can look okay if you concentrate and get the composition right. And then back at St Pancras, I've caught the afternoon light coming through these pillars here. It's such a glorious building, isn't it? So, and what a travesty that it was going to be demolished. Anyway, it is beautifully restored now, obviously, and has its rightful place as one of the greatest railway stations in the whole of Europe, I would say. Here's Kingscross. You'll notice the time here is 4:20 in the morning. And here's a shot that you can get through the glass looking at the Eurostar trains. If you're not lucky enough to go on them, you can get some pretty good views right the way through. A fairly a typical shot of the platforms, but nevertheless always worth taking because it is so completely spectacular. And then if you're lucky enough to get closer, you can get shots like this, which is more of a detailed image, which puts the contemporary furniture of the station in its place next to the beautiful Victoriana. Here's a symmetrical shot from the balcony of the atrium at St Pancras. That's super early. That's about 5:30 in the morning, that one. And you can just see that the lovely roof of Kingscross beyond here. That's a beautiful area. And this is another example of shooting on a tripod in order to keep all of the architecture and the trains and so on, everything that doesn't move completely sharp, and yet have all this blurry movement here of the commuters and the tourists sort of switching trains on the platform. It gives that lovely sense of hustle and bustle and movement. And another one with some movement in here. This is shot from, can you remember the name of the bridge, Oliver, that we were on when we shot
Victoria,
this?
is it?
It is around
that
Victoria. I don't know whether you can...
Eccleston Bridge?
Is it
Yes,
Eccleston?
it is, yes.
Yes, could be. Yeah, it rings a bell. I don't know whether you can see that view now, but this one I took in 2018. You can see from the forest of cranes here that they're only just starting on all of that schizophrenic stuff that they've put all around Battersea Power Station. But let's be thankful they've preserved the beautiful deco structure. But they're lit up red here because it was the centenary of the armistice in 1918. So in 2018. Twilight again. And here's one of the beautiful, is it 36 or 38?
38. 38.
38. And Oliver and I particularly wanted to get this shot in a Charles Holden station. So we took a chance and went on this platform. There was a train due in here, and we could have got really unlucky and the train came in and blocked the view, but I took a chance and I managed to get that shot of the train in the station that was built pretty much the same sort of time. So I'm very happy with the way that came out, and Oliver has just told me that it's coming out again this summer. Don't miss it. But the new trains can look equally amazing. There's a pair of Azumas there, and they're beneath the wonderful restored black Kingscross shed. Don't they look great underneath the old shed roof? This is looking down the side of Liverpool Street. And just a quick word about how to get these starbursts. If you shut your camera lens right down, not necessarily as far as it will go, but those of you who understand F numbers on cameras, there isn't enough time to go into it in detail tonight, but if you're used to shutting your camera lens down to f16 or f20, that's what will give you these lovely starbursts of light at night time, by simply doing that. And get out in the rain, because London streets, when they are wet, look absolutely wonderful, reflecting the neon. This is Cannon Street?
Yeah.
And the alleyway going down to the Thames, but beside Cannon Street. This one I shot from the bridge, looking back at Cannon Street, and I've used a neutral density filter, which is effectively a dense piece of glass, a bit like a sort of welding mask density, put it on the front of the lens, and it's allowed me, more or less in the daytime, to produce a 30-second exposure, which is what smoothed out all the water on the Thames. A word of warning for those of you who want to experiment with these sort of long exposures or when light levels are low. Even if you've got a tripod, if you're on a bridge and a bus goes by, it will ruin your picture, because the vibration from a bus is enough to make all of these little sharp points blurry. So get yourself over a bridge stanchion. That's the first thing to do, so there isn't any movement in the expanse between the stanchions. Here's another one shot from a bridge. Looking back, we got super lucky with a really dramatic sunset sky behind Charing Cross, and I really like all of this old traffic on the river going up towards the bridge and all of the lights coming on. Again, a sort of twilight shot. Much more interesting than a plain blue sky, in my view. And be on the lookout for details as well. This one, I'm not sure. Where's this one, Oliver?
Waterloo.
Waterloo,
Yeah.
yeah. And back illuminated as well, which has given it that kind of richness of colour. And the Waterloo clock, I've shot that at a time when the lights are really significant, and kind of got that as symmetrical as I can as well. And the detail on Victoria Station, with light from the inside as well as a bit of daylight. And when you're on your travels, again, you can pick out details and you can shoot stuff. Here we've got the belt of Venus going on behind, that effect in the sky that I told you about earlier. And that is the bottom of the gherkin, but it works okay on its own because it's a very defined triangle. And here is a wall climbing lift on the side of Lloyd's of London. And this is the pedestrian bridge from Poplar to Canary Wharf. And this is the underbelly of the Docklands Light Railway, somewhere near there, I can't remember. Thank you, Heron Quay. So I know there's going to be a lot of purists out there who love the black and white, and how lucky you are in London for black and white photography. And you can push black and white photography in directions that you can't really push colour. You can turn the sky black and have brilliant white clouds on it, and nobody bats an eyelid. They go, oh yes, they stroke their chins very sagely and say, oh yes, very artistic. And it's true, you can really push your exposures and your developing. You would in the old days if you were developing. So here are some examples of black and white. This one I shot, I was up shooting London's great railway stations actually during lockdown. I had permission to shoot because I worked alone and I obviously couldn't do it at home, and I was working continuously outside. And here is a lonely train driver going down to the end of his train to drive his train with nobody on it to somewhere because it was completely locked down. I really liked the kind of long distance loneliness of that shot, and I think it worked out well in black and white. And this one appeared in London's great railway stations, appeared in the book in colour, and my preference was always to have it in black and white. And I think the distractions of the colour, when they're not there, the black and white I think looks really powerful. Works well in colour, but I think black and white gets my vote. And this is Southwick, and the Jubilee line has quite a lot of stuff with a sort of nautical theme on it, and it's a great place to get symmetrical shots. Very hard to get symmetry perfect when you're on location, because quite often the electricians who fit the lights and the floor tilers who fit the floors don't quite always talk to each other. So the line of the lights is straight and then the line of the tiles is crooked. It's quite hard to get them to be completely symmetrical. And here's a shot of Southwick with the sun behind, backlighting it really nicely, giving these lovely long shadows. And this is a very weird building with these kind of asymmetrical pillars on it. And I set the tripod up, took that shot, and then a security guard told me to move on, so I didn't get any more of that. And this, although this is the pedestrian footbridge from Cabo Circus to Canary Wharf, and it's not like this anymore. So I shot it when it was relatively new, and in fact this was super early in the morning. I think this was about 5 a.m. and the cleaners had just finished. So there was no litter and the floor was really lovely and clean, and they let me nip in and take a couple of shots. And it has entirely lost this wonderful, pure black and white, sterile Stanley Kubrick 2001 look, and I think they've painted the interior kind of purple and red now. It's nowhere near as successful in my view. And here is Blackfriars. It's a wonderful station to shoot from as well. I think one from this session ended up in the book, but it ended up in colour. So I'm going to show a few now of new work. For the Story of the Tube second edition, because I think it's 6 years since the first edition came out, and an awful lot has happened in London since then. You've got the wonderful Elizabeth line that's been commissioned and working really well. An absolute engineering triumph. I watched the BBC documentary about 2 weeks ago called I think it was called the £15 billion Railway. And I think they need to update that, don't they? This £20 billion railway. But I was hoping that they might produce another series, because it was incredibly interesting, absolutely fascinating documentary. So here's a few of the shots. I can't show too many because I shouldn't really release them before the book comes out, but never mind. They're not necessarily going in. These are just some shots that I've put in for editorial consideration for the second edition. And this is the wonderful royal blue. I would call it, I think, cobalt, I would call that. This is the renovations that they've done at Bank Station. Wonderful for photography. And this is, again, the frame within a frame motif that I've explained in a couple of the previous images that I've shown you tonight. Again, this is on a tripod. I'm very, very lucky that I do have an access pass for TfL, and I announce myself at the operations room, and I have to wear PPE, and I have to be very careful that the stations are not too busy, but I can deploy my tripod as long as I'm super careful. And so what that has allowed me to do is to get the sharpness of all of the interior, and the people who've moved towards the platform and the train that's pulling out have moved during the exposure. So I would suspect that's probably about a second or something. So the train has moved and the people have moved as well. Just enough of a suggestion of movement that there are passengers there. And I came to London for the recent bank holiday weekend, and I thought, this is a great plan. I'll come to London when everybody else is leaving London, and there'll be nobody here. And I'll be able to get all of my photography done, and I'll be able to park my camper in London for free, because the parking is free on the bank holidays and at the weekend. And I got to my first operations room on the Elizabeth line, and it was shut. The whole line was shut. But after a little bit of Jedi mind trickery, they let me in. And I actually went down to several of the locations that were on my list, and I managed to get the Elizabeth line all to myself with no people. So I managed some really fabulous architectural photography. I feel sure that when the editors see them, they're going to make me go back and get some pictures with people in, because so many of them are empty. But this is the escalator well in Canary Wharf. And this is, I think, Battersea. Is that Battersea, Luke? Or Nine Elms? I think it's Battersea. Anyway, whatever it is, I will explain to you how I've done this shot, because this shot is 2 images.
Battersea.
Thank you, it's Battersea. Okay, so I had the choice. You either stand there and wait for an hour for 2 trains eventually to come in or go out. Or I get a shot with the train moving on this side and the train moving on this side. And because the camera is on a tripod, the composition is identical from one frame to the next. And all I've done is I have blended this side into this side. So I have got this train moving and this train moving. And when this train moved, I actually happened to get some blurry people coming down the escalator. You can see the movement look in the escalator here. I would say that's probably about 2-second exposure, something like that. And so all of this wonderful new architecture that you've been blessed with recently provides the most amazing opportunities for some really wonderful asymmetrical photos. I don't know where this is. I can't remember. It might be Monument, or it's around that sort of bank area. I have to go back and look.
It's like, it's either New Bank one.
New Bank.
Is it New Bank turned down?
I think it is.
The New Bank.
Yeah. I have to go back and look at all the other pictures I took that have got the name in, which this one doesn't. And then here's another escalator shot. This is the wonderful Bond Street. Super clean. It's a wonderful ticket hall and concourse at Bond Street. I can't remember where that one is either. Sorry.
That's Farringdon.
Farringdon, thank you, Luke. And then I think one of my favourites of the interiors so far is this one. And I went to, which station is this again? It's good job you're here.
That's Liverpool Street, isn't it?
No,
Isn't it?
no.
I should know
I think it's Moorgate.
No, it's because it's delivered by.
Anybody else got any ideas where this one might be? I think it's more, anyway, wherever it is. I went, the day I took this actually is the day after I took the original shot, where when I got back and had a look at what I'd got in the camera, I thought that, and I'd shot this on a moving escalator. And so in order to get the shot sharp on a moving escalator, I had to raise the sensitivity of the sensor in the camera. And when you do that, you get a worse signal to noise ratio. And so it was quite a grainy image. And I could clean it up reasonably, but not perfectly. So I went back the next day, and this is when the Elizabeth line was shut for the whole of the bank holiday. And I went to see the manager in the operations room, and I said, do you think you could turn the escalator off? And he went, yeah, no problem. So he turned the escalator off, and I went down and used the tripod on the escalator in order to get a super sharp shot with a much lower ISO number. And that's how I managed to get this sequence of images. And that, at the moment, I think is my favourite interior shot so far. And a twilight image, because I was specifically asked, Oliver asked me actually to get a shot of Battersea Power Station with the power station behind. And I was blessed with this beautiful evening with not too many people around. This was the bank holiday weekend again. And I've got a number of shots of Battersea. I think that is probably my favourite of all the shots I've taken, because it really puts it in its context, doesn't it? And this is a fantastic repurpose and refurbishment. For those of you who've not been down to have a look at this yet, it's well worth the visit, going down and seeing how they've managed to restore and repurpose Battersea Power Station. It's really quite something. So before we head on into questions and so on, finally, I just thought that an audience such as this would appreciate some recent image enhancements that have revealed a rather disturbing but somewhat predictable reality about the true nature of the previously discussed black hole in Messier 87. So with that, we'll open up to questions if you have any, and Oliver can answer questions about the history of the network, and I can hopefully field some questions about photography. I'll do my best. I can't always answer, but I'll try. So we've got a roving mic up here if anybody would like to kick off.
Thank you. Excellent talk and superb photography.
Oh, thank you.
My problem is I like photographing aeroplanes. RAF ones tend to be grey, and we've had a lot of grey cloud. Is there any way I can get a bit of definition between the two?
I think the short answer is no. You're struggling with what's known as the figure-to-ground ratio, and that is the differential between the subject in the foreground and the background. You're really going to have to wait for blue skies and white clouds. I think grey objects on grey backgrounds are extremely difficult to look prominent and to look bold. I'm afraid I can't offer any help there.
Thanks for a fascinating talk and
You're welcome.
some useful tips.
Thank you very
I'm
much.
lucky enough to live in Southend, so we get some quite stunning early morning shots. I just don't have the stamina or the motivation to get out and take them as much as I should. But the clarity of the light, even at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, compared to midday, it's quite astonishing how different it is.
Yeah, well, oblique light is usually preferable in the landscape rather than this giant sort of bright light over above.
What I wanted to ask was, what's your view on digitally changing or enhancing or editing pictures to take things out, for instance? I mean, I love the picture you had of Green Park Station, but my eye was caught by the back of a road sign that, to me, spoilt the picture, and I'm thinking, well, how legitimate would it be to Photoshop that out, or the litter bins that were on the pavement that draw your eye in a way you don't want them to?
Yeah, because they're for a book, none of that is possible because, and also the litter bins are just there, aren't they? There's nothing really that you can do about them, and the road sign is just there as well. So I think it needs to be real in order to go into the book. It has to be representational of the urban environment. I wouldn't have any problem if somebody had a photograph and there was a crisp packet or something on the pavement and they took that out, because it's not something that would regularly be there or normally be there. And of course, if you are shooting on digital cameras nowadays, then most people tend to shoot in RAW format, and the RAW format that comes out of the camera has not been embellished at all by the camera. When you shoot stuff on your iPhone or your smartphone is producing a file for you that has already embedded an amount of contrast and saturation and so on. So the image that's coming out of your smartphone has already been processed, but it's not been processed by you. So it's effectively an Apple or a Samsung engineer's idea of what the scene should look like. Whereas if you shoot RAW and you get your RAW files home from your camera, then you can process them in the way that you like, as you recall the scene as you saw it.
Okay, thank you. I must confess, I mean, part of my interest is in photographing buses, and one of the most annoying things is things like lampposts in the way. And where we use them in our local clubs magazine, we do occasionally remove lampposts growing out the middle of the roof of a bus because it spoils the picture. But yeah, there is that balance between you're actually distorting something, you're changing the reality.
I really struggled at Battersea Power Station because it's literally a forest of poles. There are so many traffic lights and so many security cameras, I suppose because it's the American Embassy area. It was really difficult to get a clear shot of the station and the power station behind without interference from so many vertical poles in the area. But I managed to get a couple of places where it was okay, but I didn't take anything out. I had to represent the scene.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Mr. Mapper. Oh, has someone else got them?
Do someone else first.
Sorry? Is someone else going first?
Shall I go? Okay, just want to understand what's the process of, is there a way that you can get permission to photograph on a station, not necessarily with a tripod, but just generally? The only reason I say that was I know when the Elizabeth line opened, I managed to take quite a few photos, and I think day 2, nobody bothered me. About 3 weeks later, I went back and suddenly somebody appeared from nowhere and said, you can't take pictures. So I just wondered, is there an official way that you can get permission to take pictures and wander around with a camera? Seems okay with an iPhone, but if you take a camera out, people seem to come towards you quite quickly.
Yeah, if you've got a camera that looks in any way professional, or you've got a tripod as well, then they're all over you immediately. And I must admit, I've never actually tried. I've only gone through the official channels because I've shot for the 2 previous books and now for this one. And because we get the help of our publishers, Quarto, who also get images under license from TFL, I think that probably carries a bit of weight to it. But it's not open-ended at all. I have to finish all of my work, I think, by the end of June this year. So it's just a short period of access. And certainly you wouldn't be allowed to use a tripod. So I'm afraid I don't know. There may be a way to get an official pass for a period. Luke, do you know?
It's complicated. And you have to write, you can write and you can get a response. You can ask when you go to the station, especially depending on the person you're talking to, you say, you're interested in a certain area, station, they might let you take photos, especially if you explain why you're there and what you're doing. Because a lot of it's like sort of safety and security, and they don't know what you're doing there. So it's kind of like courteous of you to tell them what you're doing, and then a lot of the time they say, oh no, I'll just take a shot.
Yeah, thank you. So the answer is I don't know, because I've always gone through an official channel, but there may be a way if you're just a hobbyist, for example, or you might, if for example, you may be able to go through. Are you a member of a photographic society or a camera club? Yeah, you might find that if the camera club applies, because I know that locally to me in Chichester in West Sussex, I spoke to somebody from the camera club there recently, and they said they recently had a trip to the Elizabeth line and managed to shoot. I didn't ask the question, but I assumed that they said that they were coming up to somebody who's in charge up there. But there is a film office at is it Green Park, or is it where's the office, Oliver? The TfL head office, the big old
opposite Southwick station.
House. Right. Yeah, so I think write to someone in the first instance and just ask a question. Mm.
Yeah, I don't need a mic. I've got a very loud voice. What station or what picture have you taken that you had a surprising emotional or emotive response from?
Westminster.
See, it's funny. You had the answer instantly.
Yeah.
It's surprising that the attachment that people have to a station.
I was completely shocked when I went to. I just love all that sort of heavy industrial metal and concrete, the way they've done it. I really like it. It's not whimsical, is it? As a station, it's not like Battersea Power Station. But yeah, I think Battersea Power Station was pretty amazing though this time round. I think from all the shots that I did previously for the galleries for the first edition, Westminster was the one that really shocked me because I had no idea that's what it was like. And it was very photogenic, incredibly photogenic. All those kind of converging tubes and staircases and boilerplate walkways, and it's mad, isn't it? I love it. What about you?
Oh, mine?
Yeah.
Long-winded. If we go, it's like a piece of string, isn't it? But if we go towards Battersea Power Station area, surprisingly, although the exterior of Battersea Power Station, as I call it, is very powerful, Nine Elms is glorious. If you get there, you'll love this. If you get there when the sunlight is low, it shines through the roundel on the entrance, and it creates a projection of a sort of colourful shadow on the floor, and it looks lovely.
Nice.
Yeah, I want to. At some point, I'm going to.
Kingscross does that as well, I think,
does,
and yeah.
I've never. Apparently, I'm always on the lookout. So I've literally got an update on Instagram when I ever see that picture pop up. Saying, what time of day is that? So I can try to put it in my schedule going down.
Yeah.
Apparently now it's about 1:30. Someone said it's showing
Okay.
through, and I went
Okay.
and I missed the shot at Kingscross. I still haven't got it at Kingscross.
Okay.
But it's more powerful than Kingscross.
At Nine Elms.
Because of the architecture.
Yeah. Yeah, I photographed those roundels at Nine Elms last time I was there, before I did the twilight shots of Battersea Power Station, and I couldn't get those roundels to work. I tried really hard, but now I know that they do that. I'll go back and try again, because I've already said to Oliver, I'm just not happy that I shot the Nine Elms station in the middle of the day. Now that I've seen the Battersea ones, obviously I want to go back and shoot Nine Elms again. Yeah. Are we done? Thank you, everybody.
Well, I certainly think that was fascinating. I've got a Canon 400D, but
There's nothing stopping you there.
it doesn't seem to work like that. But there you go. But seriously, I think we've had a fascinating talk and brilliant pictures this evening. So can we thank Benjamin and Oliver and Luke for his chipping in as well to say thanks very much for a brilliant presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. It really was. I'm just not sure to turn my camera off then and try a few.
Yeah, that's the first thing, is to take charge of the camera so that you tell it what to do rather than it telling you what it's going to do. Hello. Oh, thank you very much. No, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. Definitely that's why I come up today for to see.
Oh, right, cool. Thank you for coming. I like your shirt, by the way.
Oh,
Wicked.
Have you seen an app called Recall?
No, I have not.
Literally just
Oh, yeah, that's nice. Is that?